Hello, I am Panos Kotzathanasis, and this is Bad Accent Video Reviews. Today I'm here with Yeo Siew Hua, whose film Stranger Eyes premiered in 2023. How are you, Yeo?
Great. I'm feeling very good.
Okay,
Hi, Pat. Thanks for having
excellent.
me. Mm.
Thank you for being here. Okay, so one of the main themes of the film is the concept of seeing. I mean, the film is about seeing, watching, essentially. Tell me a bit, what is your opinion on the subject?
Yeah, I guess I've been thinking about this kind of sort of the idea of seeing or the act of seeing, or also in another way, being in a state now of seeing and being seen, so intensely,
Hmm.
um, compared to before. I mean, now we live in a moment where so much of our interactions, our existence is very tied up with seeing and being seen. You know, so yeah, these are the thoughts I was having, right? I mean, these days we are all on social media, we're all watching each other, and in a way we also want to be seen.
Hmm.
It's not just being seen by either surveillance or big corporates or each other, but in a way, you know we want to be liked and followed and subscribed and compared to before, this is a new kind of reality that I feel like a lot of people would think that if they're not seen, they don't exist, in some ways, so this idea of seeing and being seen, there's a very strong tension in the way we live now, and I thought I wanted to use this film to explore this.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. And particularly about voyeurism, what is your opinion on that? Because cinema and voyeurism always have a connection, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's tightly linked. I think what is interesting for me is that when I started pitching the movie um, for funding, and a lot of people would tell me, have you seen this film? Have you seen that film, Conversation, Lives of Others, Cachet, and all these other films? And for me, is the big realization is that, like, cinema has always had this very strong obsession, towards voyeurism and surveillance. So, I mean, using cinema to explore this is really part of a much larger tradition, It's just that I feel maybe now more so than ever, we are all carrying a camera in our pockets,
Hmm.
I feel like maybe this conversation has gone to a next stage,
Hmm.
How do we coexist, with being watched all the time, yeah, and voyeurism is a big issue in Singapore. In the last couple of years, you have a lot of cases um of voyeurism, unconsenting, of course. It's like yeah, like there's a rise in the cases of voyeuristic crimes also in Singapore. So I just thought, yeah, it's something that I wanted to tackle in the
Hmm.
film.
Hmm. But do you think that like watching people when they don't realize that you are watching them is kind of an instinct on human? Like I catch myself do it on occasion, you know?
I think so. I mean, I I don't think it's something overly ashamed,
Hmm.
to say that we all have voyeuristic tendencies, we all kind of want to see things, especially if we are told we shouldn't,
Hmm.
yeah, and that's also cinema.
Hmm.
I mean, you see in my film, I open my window and just across me, we live in these kind of tightly, densely packed apartments in Singapore. So if you open your window, you see your neighbors all the time through little windows of cinema,
Mm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
of little films happening. And I catch myself looking at my neighbors all the time, and I think they look at me too.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
in a way, that's kind of how the whole film started. You know, it's about me looking at my neighbors, seeing their everyday lives, understanding their daily rituals, and then realizing that, hey, wait a minute, I too am being watched. I'm being watched by the surveillance cameras that is all around Singapore. And so the surveillance is watching me, watching someone else. You know, there's
Mm-hmm.
this chain reaction of seeing and being seen. And really this is the main kind of impetus or inspiration for the film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And since you mentioned Singapore, because we know that there are many surveillance cameras in Singapore, as I've read, and it's a small country, very crowded. So once you realize what you just mentioned, does it make it suffocating being there? I don't know.
Um, in a way, yes and no. I mean, if you are not used to it, you know, if you're coming from somewhere else, I think the sudden realization that, you know, walking down the street every 15 minutes, you will see, you know, three or four cameras. This is a very, quite a very oppressive feeling, you know. Meanwhile, in Singapore, we grew up with surveillance cameras. You know, we're being told that they're everywhere, and you know, we have already kind of coexists with them. You know, it's a very we have a tight relationship with surveillance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For us, we it's become part of our consciousness, you know, even though we might not consciously think about it, but you know, it's part of our consciousness that we're being seen. I think there was a recent article that I read that, you know, in 2030, you know, the government wants to put 200,000 more cameras, you know, in a very small city. Singapore is a really small country, you know. And these cameras, you know, they are like, I don't know, like super high resolution, and they can see in the dark and all these things, and you know, but you know, the government isn't ashamed about it. For them, it's a good thing, you know. It's like security and you know all these things. I think for me, it's just that the conversation has changed a lot about privacy and surveillance. You know, once upon a time, we were talking about, you know, how do we avoid the encroachments of privacy, right, through surveillance. And then something happened during the pandemic. I feel that something quite a shift has happened during the pandemic, and suddenly this discourse turned itself onto its head, right? And it's suddenly like you need to be morally responsible to self-surveillance. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you need to tell people where you go and you know, who you've been, and it's like a moral responsibility, you know. So suddenly, you know, it's kind of upside down. And now after the pandemic, I feel like we're not returning to the times before. You know, now we really are about uh thinking through about how to coexist with surveillance. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Mm.
and you do this very interesting thing in the film that we watch what is happening sometimes through the eyes of the protagonists instead of, you know, the usual perspective of the audience you have in the movie. So tell me a bit about these aspects, how you work with it with your DP, let's say, and the whole approach.
Yeah, I think it's you know, we that was maybe the thing we talked about the most, which is you know, how do we whose perspective is this film from? Who is taking the lead in this scene? Yeah. I mean, that is our main discussion because we all understand that this film is about perspectives, you know, it's about points of view. I mean, if you see the film, we see that these points of view they shift also, but it's always sort of fixed to a certain point of view. And I think it's important for me that, you know, after you see the film, you understand that, it's the truth is always from a position, it's always situated within a certain point of view, and there is no grand truth that is outside of these perspectives, right? I mean, it's not just what we see, but also what we hear. I mean, and there was a lot of what we were playing around with sound design with my sound designer Tu Tu Tzu, and we were talking about what is it that we can hear and what we cannot hear. I mean, the what we cannot hear is almost as important as what we can hear in the
Mm.
film, right? So I think having these kind of more restricted points of view, and then sort of piecing them together, I think for me is maybe the aim of understanding, truth in parts, in piecemeal, that is filtered through certain people and certain points of view.
Okay. And tell me a bit about these scenes you have with the apartments that look across each other. Let's say how difficult it was to shoot that, because I was talking with someone about the film. I think it was in Tokyo, and was telling me that this was the hardest part of the production. Don't remember who it was.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. For me, this is the most I mean, I made this previous film which you know of, Alain Imagine, and we were shooting in very difficult conditions. We were shooting in like construction sites and sand quarries, and it was dangerous and difficult. And I thought, you know what, maybe for this next film, I will do something simpler. So I will shoot in residential apartments. Residential apartments are not, they're not as crazy as these factories and stuff. But I was wrong. So what was really difficult for us was about getting the two apartments, which most of the film is situated, if you saw it, right? These two apartments, I mean, they not only have to be the right fit, the right size for the shooting, and also, the right kind of apartments, because it's a little bit older and one is a little bit older, the other is a bit newer, but that they also need to look into each other at the exact same height.
Hmm.
Yeah. And this was really, really difficult, because if we manage to have one slightly above the other, the viewing angle would be very different, right? What you can see into the apartment is very limited. So it was very important that we were finding them of the same height, of sort of the same right height. But that's, I mean, easier said than done, because all of these apartments are lived apartments. We were using actual apartments with people living in them, and so we had both apartments of the right fit and size and height, and both families living in these apartments have to both be willing to be housed in a separate hotel for the 2 weeks that we were shooting, you
Oh.
know? Yeah, so this became really tricky. I mean, even though one agrees and the other doesn't, it won't work. Sort of both have to be willing at the same time. And so this posed a really tricky problem for my team, who went to knock on doors like one by one. They really went from one level to the other, from one housing estate to the other, to look for the right one. And you know, we had a pair that was sort of agreeable for us to shoot until the very last minute. I think it was 1 or 2 weeks before we start shoot, and one of them said no, they didn't want it, one of them pulled out. And then we had a problem. We scrambled again to look for another pair, and finally we did, or else there was no film.
Hmm. So
So
how
yeah,
long did it took you to find the right apartment?
this is, yeah, it was many months actually, really.
Really?
Yeah, it was many months. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm blessed with an amazing team of people who really worked very hard for the locations. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, okay. Right. And tell me a bit about the cast. You have a multinational cast, so how was it dealing with people from different ethnicities?
Mm. I mean, no, for me, it's always a joy. It's something that, I was also doing with my previous film. And then imagine we were sort of mixing people from different, countries, different contexts, even different languages, and also different acting backgrounds, So I think with this film, I mean, we had a big group of Taiwanese casting, Singapore casting, and also a Malaysian actor, Pete Teo,
Mm-hmm.
from who played the police officer. Yeah, and it was a nice mix. It was a nice mix. I mean, it took a while for everyone to sort of warm up to each other, The for the Taiwanese actors, it took a while for them to get used to Singapore. I mean, the heat, the food and everything. But then at the end, I think, when I put them together in the scene, I think they just worked very well together. I mean, I didn't it wasn't an obstacle for us. In fact, I think it just kept everyone a bit more fresh. It's like you're suddenly acting against your partner in the scene, and they are of a different kind of training. They are of a different kind of background, and it keeps you as an actor on your feet, I
Mm-hmm.
think. Yeah. I felt like the scenes for me were very fresh. It wasn't something I've seen in Singapore television, all the time. It was, for me, that was very boring, and I wanted to bring out some new synergies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how was working with Lee Kang-shen, who is like a legend, I guess?
Yeah, no, Lee Kang-shen is the legend that he is. Um, I mean, thankfully he really liked the script, and he made, a lot of accommodations for us, whether is it his time or his fees, to make sure that, he could be in the film, because I think he really liked it. He really liked the idea of the film. I mean, for me, it was a no-brainer to try to cast Lee Kang-shen for this film, because, as you know, I'm looking for a silent voyeur. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
this he is a second to none, when it comes to this role. I mean, it's how I put it is that, if you know his body of work, he's always, doing roles that has quite minimal dialogue, sometimes none. And because of that, he has such a strong mastery of his body language, just the way that he moves and the way that he breathes. Yeah, and that kind of power that I feel from his gaze is exactly what I need from a voyeur. So all of that was like really really strong, and he brought all of that to the film, and something more. It was more than, in fact, what was on this on written on script, because there's so much you cannot write on script. When I saw Lee Kang-shen first on camera, and he brought his own kind of humanity, onto the role of this creepy voyeur. It was really strong for me. I was deeply moved. Yeah. And I fell in love with the character, as I was watching him. Um, I mean, yeah, because he's the legend that he is, and he's not just because he's a good actor, but he's also a very kind and wonderful human being, and it was just a real joy to work with him.
Hmm. And are there plans to open the film in Singapore, or has it opened yet? I'm not sure.
Yesterday, the day before, we released the film in Singapore.
Okay.
Finally.
So
It was
how?
already shown in the Singapore International Film Festival last year, but um uh yeah, the day before we had the cinema release for the film.
Mm,
Yeah,
uh,
we did a Q&A, and the reception, it was great. It was like a Thursday night, and but it was full house, and I think the audience really enjoyed it.
mm. So you didn't have issues with censorship with the film? Sounds
Um,
maybe
there
not talk
is.
about it too much. Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah. But
all right, all right.
with Singapore, there's always going to be these kind of negotiations. After all, at the end, it's a very conservative structure that controls the media, and
Hmm.
so yeah, we have some issues with it.
Okay,
Mm.
okay. And what is your opinion in general of Singapore cinema right now? I mean, after the pandemic, how is it?
Um, I think things are getting better. I mean,
Mm,
I'm one to think that there is a lot of optimism in the Singapore sort of film scene that I'm looking at. Already, we are seeing so many more Singapore titles in sort of the international festival circuits, compared to before. Before, you had a couple of names, that you recognize from Singapore, maybe. But now I feel like, it's almost a wave or a movement, or we are seeing a new kind of bunch, a group of Singapore films that are like really coming out onto the international festival circuits. And for me, that's very exciting. It's good that we are having also new producers in Singapore, and which is maybe something that we were lacking, before. Like, even though we had some good filmmakers, but we didn't have a very strong sort of group, people who are producing films. So there's always kind of a bottleneck in terms of the production. But I feel like, when now that we have new young producers in Singapore who are really working their ass off, and I think it's really good for the scene. Yeah.
mm, mm. And did you attend the festival, Singapore International?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
did.
and
Yeah.
how is the situation there? I think because they changed people once more, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah, 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 yeah. There has been some changes. I mean, the 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 main programmer, KV, is still the same as before, but with the team, there have been some changes with the fundings and everything. But I think they're giving themselves a good sort of restart here. Yeah.
Hmm.
I think they claim it was said that it's maybe one of the biggest of their ticket sales
Mm,
this time. Yeah, and that's always a good news. I mean, for me, it's very clear. Increasingly over the years, it's harder and harder to get tickets for the films.
well,
You have
okay.
to book really early. I mean, I remember, when I was younger and going to the film festival, with a more art house title, it will be very empty. You
Hmm.
can go the last minute and you will be able to find tickets. Now it's not no longer like this. People are really hungry for films, outside of the commercial structures. I think it's not just that the festival is gaining more and more traction. It's also that the audience, I feel, is building a bigger and bigger audience with the Singapore audience. And that's really cool. I mean, I think this year they also had quite a record number of Singapore films. because as we just said, there is like a much bigger input, output of Singapore films. Hopefully this sustains, you know. I mean, we just have to cross our fingers because sometimes we see ebbs and flows of energies, and hopefully this energy sustains itself.
Okay, good. And last question, I guess, are you working on anything next, or is it too early?
Maybe it's a bit early for me to, put my foot down on my next film. Um, I have been developing a series,
Uh-huh.
also with my same partners from Taiwan and of course in Singapore. And yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's a format that everybody is exploring now, and I'm thinking, what we can do with this series. And so, at the moment now, I am developing the series, but I think soon I will start to really think harder about my next film and see where I go from there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, good. I guess that's it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Panos.
Okay, just a moment.